Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. Welcome, everybody. Today you will learn about the events of Fatima, Portugal in 1917, and then you will learn about the true third secret of Fatima. First of all, let me give an introduction. The book that you see displayed there, The True Third Secret of Fatima, is a book written by Pastor Mello, whose image is over here on the right of this screen. He's the author of that book. So what does this book talk about? So first of all, Christ returned to earth. And I'm not talking about 2,000 years ago. So recently, Christ, who is called the seed in Zechariah 6:12, and Christ, who gives his glory to no other, returned to earth. That is a big and major point, the major point about this book. The major point about this book is that Christ returned to earth recently. We're talking about 1917, 1918, actually, from 1918 forward. That is the third secret of Fatima. I thought it was important that I state it flat out, straight up, as the first point. The third secret of Fatima is that Christ returned to earth in 1918 in the person of Simao Toko. That is the first big major point of this book. Secondly, in that place called Fatima in Portugal, Tata Nzambi revealed three secrets to humanity. Unfortunately, the Vatican has since then only disclosed the first two secrets, but not that third secret. We will get into some detail about what they've done or not done at the Vatican to reveal those two secrets, but not the third one, and perhaps even why. There have been numerous end-time signs. They are evident and they continue to abound. You know, recently in the US, we're talking about the wildfires that have engulfed Los Angeles. We've seen the hurricanes, we've seen the floods, we've seen the weather patterns breaking and earthquakes in Europe and many other places. These end-time signs have been evident. They've increased in frequency. Some of them increased also in intensity. And they're the same end-time signs that are in the scriptures. So this event of Christ returning to earth is part of those end-time signs. The third secret of Fatima, this is the fourth point, includes lies that will be exposed. Pastor Mello says the third secret of Fatima is going to be in 5 phases, and they're the ones I'm talking about here. The first phase is a phase where we expose the lies by the church, the Catholic Church, the lies by the media, the lies by so many people trying to hide the facts of who we are as Isolele, our land, the Messiah, Christ himself. All those lies will be exposed. Then their misplaced pride will be annihilated. Then the Antichrist is also going to be revealed at this time. The 12 tribes will awaken, and the return of the true diaspora will happen as they begin to move back to Africa. Those are the 5 phases of the secret of Fatima, the third secret of Fatima. Now, I will give you some highlights, and then in the discussion, we will get to look at the texts from the book. So today I will give you highlights from the first chapter, and we will cover the first chapter. So let's get into it with the highlights. So in chapter 1, talks about the events happening around Fatima, Portugal. So the image you see to the right here, the first one, this is Fatima. It was an insignificant village that rose to become the second most visited city in Portugal. Okay. And here we see the sun dancing. This is an actual picture, not a Photoshop, nothing like that. No, this is an actual picture that somebody took in October 13th, 1917, of what was happening with the sun. First of all, notice how far down it dropped. Okay. And that is the miracle of the sun. I'll talk a little bit about that. Then there were some witnesses, Azevedo Mendes, Mario Godino, and there were also some events that were happening in Africa that were part of this celebration. This whole events in the sky, these miracles that were happening of the sun, what people witnessed, the thousands of people who witnessed. This was a celestial activity or celebration of the introduction, the introduction of the return of Christ. That's why it's a celebration. As part of that celebration, there were things that were happening in the earth. People were rejoicing and people were seeing what you would call miracles, especially in places in Africa. This man on the right here is Amkeni-Bantu. This is Amkeni-Bantu when he was young in 1921. We will discuss a little bit more about him and we'll see what happened to him and why he was part of this rejoicing on the earth. And then we'll also read during the discussion about another testimony from Finangani and Zungu. But let me start out by talking about this rejoicing in the sky. So what happened on this day in October 13, 1971, was that the sun performed what you would call an exuberant dance. It was spinning and shimmering, and there was what appeared to be like fireworks in the sky. And this happened before a crowd of onlookers who had packed together in this village. It wasn't built like this back then. It was just a village with trees, nothing insignificant for anybody to worry about. So people saw the sky do what you would call the dance. And it was witnessed by, according to the accounts of one professor, a scientist, at least between 70,000 and 100,000 onlookers. Okay. Before that sun danced like that, there was a column of smoke which appeared to be thin, fine, and bluish in color. And this smoke rose about 2 meters high above some 3 children who we'll learn about, to whom these apparitions were appearing. There was a lady appearing in the sky, is what is called apparitions, and she had appeared to these 3 children since May 13, 1917, and she had appeared 6 times: May, June, July, August, September, October. She was appearing on the 13th of every month, and she would tell them, come back, I have a message for you, and they would come. And every time they came with more people because people were hearing about it. That's how they ended up taking all these pictures. So this smoke rose about 2 meters above these children, and then it would suddenly dissipate or disappear. And then it occurred again for a second time and even a third time. And one of the witnesses, which was that professor that I mentioned, we'll see his name later on in the discussion. He said that when the smoke was dissipating and reappearing the third time, one of the girls, her name was Lucia dos Santos, this is the one who was a custodian of the third secret, turned around because everybody was focused looking at the three children and this mysterious smoke that was appearing above them. One of the girls turned around and pointed to their back, and on the opposite side was the sun spinning and doing all this. So not only was there some smoke that was a miracle, so to speak, because it would appear and reappear above these children, but also there was this sun that did what could not be explained. This is what they call the dance of the sun. And that happened just around noon to like 1:30. And it was witnessed by 70 to 100,000 people. Pictures were taken. You can Google it. You see it on news channels, media, TV. I mean, sorry, not TV, but radio, not radio, print, newspapers. It was published in the New York Times and many other famous publications at that time, in 1917. So these events did happen. That's the point. These events happened in a place called Fatima, Portugal. At the same time, in 1917, there was already in this man called Simão Kimbangu, who was born in the late 1800s. And Simão Kimbangu, as of 1917, he had mentioned, sorry, not as of 1970, but as of 1910, he had mentioned that he would be born again in 1918. And people didn't understand what he was saying. But then in 1921, in 1918, that's when Simão Toko was born. So Simão Kimbangu was basically saying, you can see me, but I will come in a different form in 1918. He was telling them 8 years in advance that the same spirit that is in me is going to come in 1918. And it did come. Simão Toko was born in 1918. Now, Simão Toko was born on the 24th of February, which would be next week, I think Thursday or Friday, but 101 years ago. And it was exactly, on the day of his birth, it was exactly 9 months after the first apparition of May in 1917. So in February 18th, February 24th, it was 9 months later. So all these events that were happening in Fatima, Portugal, were an announcement or an introduction of Christ returning in Simão Toko. Just like 2,000 years ago, there was a major announcement, celestial activity, the star in the sky, the angels who appeared to Mary, to the shepherds, the wise men who followed the star. Similarly, this is what was happening in 1917, 1918. So Kimbangu in 1921, I believe it was around May or somewhere around May, April, after trying to avoid the voice of the Most High that was telling him to teach people about Christ, he finally accepted. He went back and forth, Jonah style, but he finally accepted. And he started preaching and teaching in his village called Nkamba in modern-day DRC. But within a very short period, he was performing miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead, and so on and so forth. Some of those are captured in the testimony of Inangani and Zungu in here, number 7. This was the rejoicing on the earth that was going on because the power of the Most High was now being manifested in Kimbangu, who was a forerunner to Toko, just like John the Baptist was a forerunner to Messiah or Christ 2,000 years ago. And the Portuguese colonizers, the Portuguese missionaries in Congo and in DRC were not happy with what Kimbangu was doing. So they connived with the government, arrested him after his 6 months of ministry, very powerful ministry. They arrested him and jailed him for 30 years, from 1921 until 1951, where he died in prison. They were so scared of his ministry of just 6 months that they jailed him for life to prevent his message from spreading. Just exactly the same thing that they did to John the Baptist. Herod arrested him and killed him because he was afraid that the king that John the Baptist was introducing, which was Christ, would overpower Herod. So, the same way, the Portuguese authorities tried to get rid of Kimbangu because they were afraid of what was coming in Simao Toko. So that is basically the introduction of the first chapter and this book, The True Third Secret of Fatima Revealed. Let's get into some discussion. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful.